Welcome back to another Pirkei Avot text explication video with me, your host, Rabbi Drew. We are now on the second text in the 5th chapter, and just as I had mentioned with the previous text, this chapter is a lot of anonymous, or at least non-attributed. There are no sages particularly mentioned, at least not by name. That has been something that has been the hallmark of what we have experienced in the first 4 chapters. Statements, sayings that are attached to names of rabbis. So far in this 5th chapter, and really what we're going to see throughout this chapter is really not. It's non-attributed to any particular rabbis. I also mentioned that in the previous text that we saw the number 10 stand out prominently, and we're going to actually see that for the next few texts, including this one as well. So without further ado, we're going to get Asara Dorot me'Adam v'ad Noach. There were 10 generations from Adam to Noach. This is a very similar start to this particular text as we had experienced in the previous text that started off with an assertion, the number 10, relating to something biblical. And now we have some backing, because now it continues and it says, the Hodia kama erech apayim lefanav shekol hadorot hayu machisim uvayim ad shehevi aleim es me hamabo, in order to make known. Not simply there were 10 generations from Adam to Noah. Okay, that's nice information. But now this text in Pirkei Avot is saying there's a reason. It's to make known how long-suffering God is. For all those generations kept on provoking God until God brought upon those generations the waters of the flood. So we're supposed to understand that these 10 generations, for God to endure these 10 generations to show how erech apayim he is, how long-suffering he is. Now, if you're curious, who are these 10 generations and where do they come from? Well, actually, it's right there in the 5th chapter of Genesis. So it's nothing hidden. It's nothing, tucked away. And if you were curious, the 10 generations are Adam, his son Seth, his son Enosh, his son Canaan, his son Mahalalel, his son Jared, his son Enoch, his son Methuselah, his son Lamech, and then finally his son Noah. We're not done with this text because the text continues. Asara dorot mi Noach v'ad Abraham. There were actually 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. So very similar to the first part of this text. There were 10 generations from Adam till Noach, and now there are 10 generations from Noach to Abraham. And just like the first part of the text, we're going to get sort of a reason. Okay, this is nice factual information that anybody could have read in the book of Genesis. What further are we supposed to somehow learn out of this? Well, the Hodia kama erech apayim lefanav shekol hadorot hayu machisim uvayim ad sheba Avraham v'kiba alav sechar kulam. And there were 10 generations from Noach to Abraham in order to make known what long-suffering God is, how patient God is. For all those generations kept on provoking him until Abraham came and received the reward of all of them. And similarly to what we saw in the first part, these 10 generations are not tucked away. They're not some, secret. They're actually right there in the 11th chapter of Genesis. And these are, after Noah, we get Shem, his son Arpachshad, his son Shalach, his son Ever, his son Peleg, his son Reu, his son Serug, his son Nahor, his son Terach, and then finally his son Avram, whose name later gets changed to Avraham. And so now this isn't it. So again, we have 10 generations clear right out there in the book of Genesis. Interesting, we have in the first part this explanation of until, God waited for 10 generations to bring this flood. Now in the second part, it's, at least according to Pirkei Avot, it says to show how long-suffering or patient God is. Again, all those generations were provoking him until Abraham received the reward of all of them. Now, it's a little unclear. What does that mean? What reward is there? Why didn't they receive a reward? What I think is going on, and it's not spelled out here, but this is what it seems to me, is that Abraham heeds the call of God that we see very clearly in at least Parashat Lech Lecha, that we see that that God says, Lech lecha, go for yourself, Abraham, go from your homeland, all these things that you're familiar with, and go. That somehow Abraham was somehow a recipient of God's word, had a connection, because we really don't see it, certainly not in chapters 5 and chapters 5 and 11 of Genesis, that any of these various generations necessarily had a clear connection with God. We do see, yes, Adam speaks with God, Noah speaks with God, and of course Abraham speaks with God. So I think that's what this text is getting at, is that these three particular figures, Adam, Noah, Abraham, had relationships with God, but all the intervening, these 10 generations, they did not. And that God had to be patient to make this connection, to make this relationship, and to make things happen. So that is our second text in the 5th chapter. Thank you so much for watching.